May 17, 1942. Pearl Harbor. Beneath the sun-bleached glare of the Pacific, beneath the flags and the palm shadows and the outward ceremony of a fleet rebuilding itself, there is a lower world of stale air and ceaseless light. In a cramped room known by its bland designation, hypo, fans churn heat that refuses to leave. Fluorescent tubes buzz with a tired electrical impatience. Paper lies in drifts and stacks, pencil marks pressed hard enough to score wood. Somewhere in the corner, as a dented percolator mutters and hisses, and the smell of strong coffee, dark, bitter, reliably present, mixes with cigarette smoke and the sharp tang of ink. Above ground, steel and salt water decide the fate of empires. Down here, the war is fought in silence, against five-digit numbers that are supposed to mean nothing at all. This moment matters because the Pacific War, in the late spring of 1942, is balanced on a narrow rail. Japan has moved from victory to victory. And then the American Pacific Fleet, apart from a handful of aircraft carriers, has been left in ruin. If the next Japanese blow lands in the right place, it may not merely bruise American power. It may tear the Pacific open and place Hawaii, and perhaps the American coast beyond it, under a shadow that cannot be quickly lifted. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz does not have surplus strength to waste. In that precarious state of affairs, as the difference between being ready and being 3,000 miles out of position is the difference between history and catastrophe. And the most decisive weapon available to him is not a gun, not armor plate, not even an aircraft carrier. It is knowledge. For the Japanese High Command, the war is meant to be decided by doctrine and daring, by shock and carefully engineered inevitability. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who has seen America with his own eyes, does not mistake its material strength. He fears it. Before the war, he warns that at the outbreak of hostilities he will run wild for a year, but has utterly no confidence for the second or third year. He understands the logic of American industry, the way a democracy, once fully aroused, can turn assembly lines into fleets and factories into strategy. His answer is speed. Lure the remaining American carriers into a decisive battle, destroy them in one stroke, and force a negotiated peace before American production can become American destiny. The plan is clean on paper and terrifying in implication. It assumes the enemy will be blind at the critical moment. That assumption is where the story turns, quietly at first, almost invisibly, in the drift of intercepted radio traffic and the incremental progress of people most sailors will never meet. The task of giving Nimitz a sense of Japan's intentions falls to the U.S. In Navy's radio intelligence and code-breaking apparatus, OP-20G and its field stations, built over years into something that can catch distant signals and grind them down into meaning. Lawrence F. Safford, called the father of Navy cryptology, helps shape this system and helps place Commander Joseph Rochefort in charge of Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor. It is not glamorous work. It is obsessive work. It is work that, at its best, turns scattered fragments into a picture of the future. In the Japanese mind, cryptography is a fortress. The Imperial Navy's operational code, known to Americans as JN-25, is not a simple cipher. It is a layered mechanism designed to defeat patience itself. It uses roughly 45,000 five-digit code groups, each standing for a word or phrase, then super-enciphers those groups with an additive table before transmission. To break it, the codebreakers must strip away the additive through mathematical analysis, and then map meaning onto bare numbers by studying usage patterns over time, by watching how the enemy speaks, repeats, and betrays himself through habit. Even with skill, it is painfully slow. Before Pearl Harbor, only about 10 to 15% is being read. Yet in 1942, Rochefort's team begins to make progress, enough not for omniscience, but for something almost as valuable: informed judgment under pressure. On screen, if this were shown the way it truly felt, the camera would not rush. It would linger on hands. on pencil erasers worn to the nub, on coffee poured into chipped mugs without ceremony, again and again, as if replenishment itself were a small, defiant luxury. Coffee is not merely a stimulant in that basement. It is a symbol of American abundance translated into routine. The same nation that has just watched battleships burn can still supply the tiny comforts that keep minds working through the night. Against an enemy that trusts in secrecy and decisive stroke, yes, there is a different kind of strength here: endurance, redundancy, and the ability to keep going until the numbers yield. The emotional contrast is sharp, and it is not symmetrical. Japanese admirals expect a war of controlled variables, a feint here, a landing there, carriers striking from an unseen position, the Americans reacting like a predictable mechanism. The Americans, after December 7th, expect to spend months surviving and retreating, losing ground, bleeding ships, is waiting for shipyards and training pipelines to catch up with disaster. Yet what both sides actually experience is a kind of distortion of reality caused by signals intelligence. Japan believes it has built a plan that will force America to reveal itself. America, in the most critical hours, is allowed to see outlines of the plan before the plan becomes irreversible. The trap is still deadly, but it begins to close in the opposite direction. In the spring of 1942, as Japanese intercepts begin referring to a pending operation whose objective is designated as AF. Rochefort and Captain Edwin Layton, Nimitz's fleet intelligence officer, believe AF may be Midway, in part because they have seen A designators attached to locations in the Hawaiian chain. Logic supports the conclusion. Midway is a distant hinge point, a forward outpost that guards the approaches to Hawaii. But logic is not proof, and Nimitz cannot wager the fleet on a guess, and no matter how educated. This is where intelligence becomes not merely analysis, but craft, part science, part theater. A ruse is devised. In mid-May, Midway is instructed to send a message in the clear stating that its water distillation plant has been seriously damaged and that fresh water is needed immediately. It is a small act of deception, almost domestic in its details, one lonely outpost complaining of thirst. Not long after, as an intercepted Japanese intelligence report arrives, AF is short of water. In that single sentence, the cold machinery of JN-25 produces a human confirmation. The target is Midway. For Nimitz, the world tightens into a clearer shape. For Yamamoto, the world remains as he believes it is, opaque, disciplined, sealed. The Americans, with coffee steaming in the basement, have just reached into the future and pulled out a name. Yet Nimitz begins to draw up plans to move his carriers to a point northeast of Midway where they can lie in wait. This is not bravado, it is necessity. At the time, his 3 aircraft carriers, 45 fighting ships, and 25 submarines are what stands between Hawaii, the American West Coast, and a Japanese fleet that has not yet suffered a significant defeat. He has, in effect, one chance to meet the blow at the right point on the map. As communications intelligence gives him time to place forces where they need to be, time to reinforce Midway, time to create the possibility of an ambush rather than a pursuit. The war at sea is often described in miles and knots. Here it is described in days. The evidence that this was not guesswork, not legend, but recorded advantage is woven through the documented chain of events. Rochefort's work helps provide Nimitz the crucial estimate. The attack on Midway will commence on the 3rd of June, and the decisive clash will come on the 4th of June. In the official historical accounting, this foreknowledge is treated as a factor of preparation, not a supernatural gift. Yet for the men who will fly toward the Japanese fleet with fuel gauges sliding toward empty, it is the difference between searching the wrong ocean and finding the enemy at all. June 3, 1942. Midway's aircraft locate and attack Japanese transports roughly 600 miles west of the atoll. B-17S strike without effect, and PBY Catalinas are sent for a night attack where one torpedo hits a fleet tanker. Meanwhile, as part of the broader Japanese plan, aircraft from light carriers attack Dutch harbor in the Aleutians, an operation meant to pull American attention northward. The Japanese design expects American reaction to be scattered and late. It is an elegant plan when the enemy is blind. But the enemy is not blind. The enemy is waiting. Just after midnight on June 4th, Nimitz advises Task Forces 16 and 17 of the Japanese main body, its course, speed, and distance from Midway. At dawn, a patrol plane reports the direction and distance of the incoming aircraft. Many planes heading Midway. The first blows fall on the island's installations. Marine fighters are mauled, and successive American attacks, Marine scout bombers, Navy torpedo bombers, Army bombers, are met by Japanese cap and anti-aircraft fire with brutal efficiency. To the Japanese, and this looks like confirmation, American strikes are piecemeal, costly, predictable. This is what Japanese carrier doctrine is built to destroy. The admirals expect the pattern to continue until the Americans have nothing left. Then the war does what it so often does. It turns on timing, exhaustion, and the invisible math of decision-making. Between roughly 9:30 and 10:30, American torpedo squadrons attack and are nearly annihilated. Their sacrifice draws fighters down and pulls the Japanese defensive umbrella out of position. At approximately 10:20 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's SBD Dauntless dive bombers arrive over the Japanese carriers. In minutes, 3 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, are hit and burning, mortally wounded amid armed aircraft and volatile fuel. Later that day, the 4th carrier, Hiryu, is found and struck as well. The Japanese have not merely lost ships. They have lost the core instruments of their offensive war, carriers that participated in the Pearl Harbor attack, crews and air groups that represent experience that cannot be manufactured overnight. The trap has snapped shut, but it has snapped on the hand that built it. The documented aftermath is as stark as the battle's sudden violence. The Japanese abandon the Midway invasion plan and withdraw. On June 6th, American aircraft sink the cruiser Mikuma and damage other ships. On the same day, the Japanese submarine Amigant 168 torpedoes the wounded Yorktown and sinks the destroyer Hammond. Yorktown finally rolls over and sinks at dawn on June 7th. Victory does not erase loss. It does not turn the Pacific into a safe sea, but it changes direction. Against the loss of 1 American carrier, Japan loses 4 carriers and, crucially, loses over 100 trained pilots who cannot be quickly replaced. And the offensive momentum that once seemed inevitable now has a bruise that will deepen into a permanent strategic injury. To understand why Japanese admirals never truly knew what happened to their unbreakable plans, it helps to see the illusion they lived inside. They saw radio silence as discipline and cryptographic complexity as armor. They saw a doctrine of decisive battle as destiny. Yet what they could not see was the quiet vulnerability built into any system used repeatedly under wartime pressure. Patterns, habits, additive tables reused, the statistical fingerprints of an operational machine trying to be both fast and secure. JN-25's repetitive use of additive tables increased its vulnerability, and once enough of the system was peeled open, even partial reading, combined with traffic analysis and operational inference, could reveal intent. And the Japanese experienced Midway as a sudden ambush, an outbreak of American luck, a moment when the gods of war favored their enemy. The Americans experienced it as a hard-earned convergence of analysis, deception, and readiness. And yet the story of magic runs deeper than JN-25 alone, because the Pacific War's hidden contest of codes begins before the first bombs fall. In Washington, in the years before Pearl Harbor, another kind of cipher is being attacked. Japanese diplomatic systems, including the machine Americans call Purple. In a June morning in 1930, William Friedman, chief of the Army's Signals Intelligence Service, walks into the abandoned vault of the American Black Chamber and, striking a match, announces, "Welcome, gentlemen, to the archives of the American Black Chamber." It is a small flare of light in a corridor of secrecy, a reminder that even in peacetime, nations listen. That the future of wartime intelligence is already being assembled in rooms that do not appear on propaganda posters. Purple is more complex than the earlier red system, and the challenge is made almost mythic by one fact. No Westerner has seen the purple machine. Still, under Frank Rowlett, the team uses cribs, predictable openings, and painstaking pattern work to separate letters into groups, the 6s and the 20s. The breakthrough becomes mechanical as well as mental. Leo Rosen finds a device in an electrical supply catalog, the Uni selector, and uses stepping switches to help build an analog that can mimic the machine's scrambling pattern. Each section connects through hundreds of wires. A typewriter feeds in ciphertext. Another typewriter returns deciphered language. According to the NSA's museum account, historian Stephen Budiansky describes the moment of truth. Late one night, power is applied, a switch is flipped, and as ciphertext is typed in, deciphered Japanese text emerges. Something real, something readable, rising out of what had been pure noise. It is technological audacity made physical. In the narration's visual imagination, this is where the recurring coffee returns, not as a quaint detail, but as an emblem of capacity. The purple effort requires specialized equipment, long hours, and a bureaucracy willing to sustain work that produces nothing visible until it produces everything. Coffee cups ring desks where no applause is ever heard. In wartime democracies, abundance is not only material, it is organizational. The ability to fund parallel lines of effort, to tolerate uncertainty, to allow people to keep working in obscurity without immediate reward. This is not sentiment, it is structure. And it matters. And because magic, the intelligence derived from purple, will shape understanding of Japanese diplomatic strategy, even as it also reveals the limits of diplomatic intercepts when the real intent resides in operational orders at sea. The historical record is blunt about one painful truth. By late 1940, the U.S. Army and Navy can read Japanese diplomatic messages between Tokyo and major embassies, calling the purple-derived intelligence magic. But the Purple Diplomatic Code does not provide specific military information. It does not give advanced knowledge of the Pearl Harbor attack. The machinery of interception exists, and yet the decisive blow still lands. The gap between what is readable and what is actionable becomes a wound in American memory, one that will later harden into an obsession with intelligence integration, warning systems, and the prevention of strategic surprise. In the NSA's Purple account, the success is even described as having a downside. It distracts American cryptology from the true indicator of Japanese intentions, the Naval Code. That is a lesson learned the hard way, with smoke rising from battleships in shallow water. By midway, that lesson has been partially absorbed into operational reality. The Americans do not merely collect intercepts, they act. They do not merely admire cryptanalytic brilliance. They place carriers where brilliance can become effect, and the chain of evidence includes more than technical descriptions. It includes judgments by senior leaders after the fact. In the NSA Midway History, historian Gordon Prange is quoted emphasizing that Midway was a positive American victory, not merely the avoidance of defeat. General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, frames the strategic value in a single line that removes romance and leaves only consequence. As a result of cryptanalysis, we were able to concentrate our limited forces to meet their naval advance on Midway, when we otherwise would have been 3,000 miles out of place. These are not poetic words, they are administrative words. That is why they are so convincing. There is also the quieter evidence of institutional friction. the human grain beneath the technical narrative. Thierry Rochefort's position in the intelligence system is not simply a heroic pedestal, it is a contested node. As later accounts describe, Rochefort's job is to gather raw data and send it to Washington through official channels. Yet in practice, he bypasses parts of that chain and communicates Station Hypo's findings directly to Edwin Layton at Pearl Harbor, partly because they are friends, and partly because speed matters when decisions have deadlines measured in hours. Yes, this kind of side-channel cooperation works within the theater, even as it provokes resentment elsewhere. It is the messy reality of wartime organizations. Truth can arrive faster when it travels along personal trust, and personal trust can collide with hierarchy. The Japanese admirals, looking outward at American fleets, never see these internal currents. They only see the results. American readiness where unreadiness should have been. But now the transformation, the part of the story that changes how people understand not only a battle, but an ideology. For Japanese naval leadership, Midway is meant to confirm a world view that carefully planned operations, executed with disciplined secrecy, can force an opponent into a single decisive moment. The shock of Midway does not instantly destroy that worldview, but it corrodes its certainty. It suggests that the enemy is not merely resilient, and the enemy is adaptive in ways that are difficult to anticipate. In a militarized empire that prizes control, the idea that an adversary can read intent from the air itself is an affront. It is not just a tactical surprise, it is an epistemological wound. Plans are supposed to belong to the planners. At Midway, plans leak into the enemy's hands without spies, without visible betrayal, only through the physics of radio and the mathematics of persistence. For Americans, the transformation is equally profound, but in the opposite direction. Pearl Harbor has taught the United States the price of surprise and the danger of complacency. Midway teaches that surprise can be seized back through analysis, through preparation, through the disciplined fusion of intelligence and operations. A democracy, often caricatured as slow and divided, demonstrates that it can innovate under existential pressure. The men in the hypo basement, he hunched over numbers with coffee cooling beside them, become part of a larger machine of response, one that learns to turn information into force. This is not romantic. It is practical. It is also ideological. The war is not only about islands and sea lanes, it is about whose system can convert knowledge into survival faster. Symbolism in this story does not require invention. It already exists in the mundane object that keeps reappearing, the coffee pot in the basement, and in the mug carried from desk to desk. In one sense, it is only coffee. In another, it is a condensed image of American capacity, the ability to supply, to sustain, to keep people working in rooms the public will never see, for outcomes the public will never fully be told during the war itself. Japanese admirals imagine America as decadent, soft, distracted by comfort. What they do not anticipate is how comfort can be converted into endurance, how abundance can become stamina, how a society capable of producing excess can also produce persistence. The mug is not merely a prop, it is a quiet flag, a democracy's ordinary luxuries repurposed into wartime focus. And still, a final contrast remains, the one that makes the title's claim feel less like exaggeration and more like tragedy. The Japanese admirals do not fully know, at the time, how deeply their communications have been penetrated, and they do not experience defeat as an intelligence failure so much as a sudden reversal of fortune. In the fog of war, they see American planes arriving at the wrong moment for Japanese safety, as if guided by intuition or chance. They do not see the weeks of incremental code-breaking progress, the inference, the deception message about water, the analytic arguments, the risk Nimitz takes by positioning his carriers northeast of Midway. They do not see the paper trail because the paper trail is on American desks, not Japanese bridges. And after the war, when magic and code-breaking histories surface, what emerges is not a tale of sorcery but a record of labor. Human minds, sustained by institutions, sustained by logistics, sustained by a percolator that never quite seems to run dry. Epilogue, then, returns not to a map but to a room, and to what that room signifies. The Pacific Ocean is often described as emptiness, but in war it becomes a vast amplifier. Every transmission travels across it. Every signal leaves a trace. The Japanese Empire, confident in secrecy and decisive battle, sends its intentions into the air. Believing complexity is the same as invisibility. The American system, imperfect, bureaucratic, sometimes distracted by the wrong stream of intelligence, learns to listen better, to integrate faster, to act sooner. In the end, freedom and abundance are not abstract virtues floating above history. Yes, they are mechanisms. They are the capacity to build tools without seeing the enemy's machines, to sustain teams whose work cannot be celebrated in real time, to absorb shock and still fund patience. Coffee is only coffee until it becomes the scent of a night shift that does not quit. And a democracy is only a political idea until it proves, in the middle of the Pacific, that information can be turned into defense and defense into a future.